Corruption is defined as the abuse of public resources by private or public people or institutions. That's according to the Executive Director of Corruption Watch, Mr. David Lewis. Now, this came in light of Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index report released last year that gave South Africa a rating of 61 out of 178 countries with a score of 44 out of 100. Now, that did not place the country amongst the ranks of countries with serious corruption problems. In 2016, a total of 4,391 reports of corruption were received, a substantial increase on previous years since Corruption Watch was launched in 2012. This amounts to an average of around 11 reports a day, compared to 7 in 2015. Now, the Executive Director of Corruption Watch, Mr. David Lewis, is here himself today. Mr. Lewis, great to be with you.
Yeah, good. Thank you for inviting us.
The perception that corruption is ever increasing in South Africa, is that fair and accurate?
Yeah, well, we have a serious problem. I mean, you know, this year, not a week goes by where the next corruption problem report eclipses the one before that you thought was the biggest that you could ever see. So we have a serious question. Whether it's increasing or decreasing is very hard to measure. But, you know, what is clear is that we have a big corruption problem. And in fact, our score on the Corruption Perception Index does place us in the ranks of countries with a serious corruption problem. Any country that scores below 50 out of 100 has a serious corruption problem. 61
out of 178, compared to the rest of the world, yeah. not horrific.
Not by no means the worst, and South Africans shouldn't tell themselves that, because, I mean, you know, not a long way below us, there are countries whose problem could never be solved.
Yeah.
We're still in a situation where we can solve the problem, and that's very important to know. But we do have a serious corruption problem, and as I say, below us, not far below us, there are places where you really don't want to go to.
Is part of our problem the perception created about public servants being corrupt and the perception of corruption, where similar things happen in what we call the private sector and business, and quite often it doesn't make the same headlines or the same waves in the media and social media?
Yeah, well, those perceptions are important. I mean, you know, you and I, you know, our contact with the private sector is that we go into stores, we buy things, we do all of that kind of thing. But who do we connect with in the public sector? We connect with the licensing department, we connect with the department that allocates houses, we connect with the public transport system, with the public health system, and so we make up our minds on the basis of the experience that we have with the public sector. And if those are the perceptions, then they are based on that reality.
I spoke to a whole range of stakeholders this morning, from the Ethics Institute right down to Competition Commission and so forth. The one I wanted to point you towards was the Competition Commission in South Africa, who were investigating 133 cases of, well, in business it's called collusion, of course. If it was elsewhere, it would be corruption, collusion, price fixing, and really shafting of the poor, if one can call it that. Things like bread, milk, water, school uniforms, margarine, the basics are being price fixed. As Corruption Watch, how do you view that kind of unethical behaviour compared to stealing from the public purse? Yeah,
no, I'm very familiar with that kind of behaviour. In fact, I used to chair the Competition Tribunal for 10 years. And, you know, I know that happens, and it is, as you say, absolutely unethical and absolutely egregious and contrary to the law and must be prosecuted. There's an interesting rider to that, though. You know, we get, as you've described, thousands of reports of corruption here. We never get a report about collusion. And the reason for that is not because there is no collusion, but because the public trust that if they report it to the authority that is there to deal with this, that something will be done about it. They don't feel the same way about reporting things to the Hawks or the presidential hotline. And that's why, that's the difference. You know, all power to the Competition Commission. And I'm pleased that people report it to them rather than to us, because they're in a much more powerful position to punish it as it deserves to be. But that is a very unusual case of pure private sector corruption. Most corruption is about an interface between the public and the private.
the corruptor and the corruptee, as it were.
And it might be a big firm and a procurement adjudication committee, or it may be you and a traffic cop.
Talk about me and the traffic cop. The one thing that was pointed out by the Ethics Institute is that they're a little bit concerned about this culture of bribery, they call it, that could be developing here in South Africa. How do you view this culture of bribery, and do you think it's time for us to fight this tooth and nail?
No, absolutely. And you know, the kind of behavior change stuff that the Ethics Institute are concerned with, that we're concerned with, that many people are concerned with, is very difficult. You know, I think that one of the ways of doing it is to take you and the traffic cop. I mean, most people think of that as an innocent exchange, and everybody does well out of it. You pay a smaller fine than you would have been paid for drunken driving, and the traffic cop has more money in his pocket, and nobody suffers. Except if you think of us as having the highest rate of road accident deaths in the world, and most of those are as a result of driving under the influence. And so the people who are prejudiced by it are, to put it crudely, dead. And, you know, that's why this notion that these are innocent exchanges, somebody who pays to get into the front of the housing queue has excluded somebody else from housing. And it's
been
about
waiting for 20 years.
It's about having regard for others, you know, rather than for only oneself.
You talk about that, and the fallout from that kind of thing is the kind of unhappiness and protest culture that's also developing, because some people feel prejudiced by this kind of activity.
Yeah, I mean, this service, you know, the reports that we get on service delivery protests, sometimes rightly, but sometimes wrongly, but inevitably, people ascribe the fact that they're not getting sufficient services to a corrupt councillor, a corrupt firm supplying a house, supplying community facilities. All of them ascribe it to corruption. And, you know, as I say, that's not always right, but it tells you something about the strength of the perception.
At Corruption Watch, you deal with, as you pointed out, dozens and dozens and hundreds of cases. What are some of the interesting ones you think that would be of interest to the public that we don't really know about, or we're not really focusing on?
We get a full range of issues. I mean, one of the most interesting that we've dealt with, and that took us all by surprise, was the volume of reports we got about corruption in the management of schools' resources. Now, this is the difference between kids getting an extra toilet or a textbook, or in fact school lunch, and not getting that at all. So the amount of money involved in every single transaction doesn't compare to the Nkandlas and the Escoms, but it hurts.
Yeah,
it really hurts.
It hurts the man in the street.
Yeah, it hurts the child in the street.
Is it time for us to get to a place where we need tougher action against what the Competition Commission told me earlier, misdemeanors? That's what they call it.
Well, you know, strictly speaking, until very recently, the Competition Commission offences against the Competition Act for a variety of technical reasons not being crimes, and they've just been made so. These are not misdemeanors. I mean, the kind of corruption that we're dealing with are crimes, pure and simple. And of course, the largest problem is that people feel that there is no risk in engaging in it, because frankly the police, whatever Minister Khadebe I heard saying earlier, are not doing nearly enough. And particularly when there are powerful politicians or indeed powerful business people involved, they're doing hardly anything at all.
How do we turn the ship around as a nation? And I'm not just talking about corruption, I'm talking about bribery, the culture of unethical behavior that we're seeing that's rising in our country. Well,
you know, there are a number of solutions. I mean, in some cases there are systems that need to be tightened up, like the procurement system or the appointment process or whatever. The second issue has got to do with the police and the NPA. I mean, you know, soon, in the next 6 months, a new head of the Hawks has got to be appointed. We really want to see that for just about the first time that this is a person of integrity, and we're going to be running a large public campaign around that, because the police and the prosecuting authority are a real problem. But the third ingredient, and this is the one that we're into, is that the public have to speak out, the public have to exercise pressure, and they're doing that in ever larger numbers, and that's what really gives me the most comfort about solving the problem.
David Lewis, I thank you for joining us. Interesting views, and certainly the numbers don't lie to us. The Executive Director of Corruption Watch, David Lewis.